Yes, we're going back into our second presentation. Again, if you have questions that pop up during the presentation, write it in the chat, or if you have any remarks that you feel need addressing, and only those questions that will be posed in the chat will then have, those participants will have the chance to pose them in the Q&A session that will follow. Also, one more thing, we will be sharing the PowerPoint presentations of the speakers after the event. So we will be sending them via email to all of you, as we did with yesterday's guests. Is there anything else I need to add at this point? Maybe just for the, maybe just for the journalists in attendance, that we will most likely also be sending a short media release at the end of the day or tomorrow early morning. And yeah, that's about it from the technical side of things again. And now we're going, I will be inviting our second speaker of the day, Philip Johnstone, to join us and take the floor. Philip works as a research fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit of University of Sussex. His work has focused on energy policy, the role of the state in sustainability transitions, industrial policy, phase-out policies, and discontinuation in science and technology. And within that, he also focuses on issues around nuclear power, particularly around civil-military connections in civil nuclear policy. So without further ado, I would now invite Philip to share his screen.
Yeah.
Himself and yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'll just share the screen. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, hello there, everybody, and thanks for having me at this very interesting conference. And my presentation follows on quite nicely, actually, from some of the questions that, or issues that Steve was raising at the end there, because Steve set out very clearly how uneconomic and how peculiar in many ways the UK's nuclear enthusiasm is when you look at the costs of Hinkley C compared to the cost of renewables and so on. And a key question really is not the how or the technical questions around the economics, but the why. Why is a country like UK and other countries around the world persistently attached to new nuclear when the energy system is undergoing such profound changes? And within this presentation, I'm keen to kind of expand the nuclear debate beyond these usual confines that we're often stuck in at the moment, in terms of, okay, you discuss climate change, you discuss economics, and that's about it. There's many other political, democratic issues that are important to raise. And this presentation is going to focus on research that we've been doing over the past 4 years. It's going to look at a comparison between Germany and the UK to understand what are the drivers for divergent nuclear trajectories. Then it's going to look at international patterns related to military and civil, and also focus in on the UK case. And what we can see at the broad level really is the kind of question we're asking is, why is nuclear power so resistant in particular places around the world to these dramatic changing global energy market conditions that we're seeing? In other words, why is it so challenging to discontinue nuclear power in certain contexts? And as Steve has set out, as other presentations have set out, this is really against a backdrop of a stark decline in the worldwide nuclear industry. Yet it remains a major area of investment in a few specific countries, and these intense attachments persist, despite nuclear becoming less attractive. So this is a kind of from my background, this is a classic question in social science research. And it's to be aware that it's a very complex area. There's lots of ambiguous and uncertain factors at play. And we've been really cautious to use a variety of methods to try and sources to triangulate the information that I'm going to share with you today. And another point is that despite it being a classic question that social science research would pose, this why question, it really hasn't been one that's been focused on much. I'd argue that the debate has been, in many ways, increasingly technocratic, I think, and I'll talk about this at the end, but if you look at the kind of issues the Green movement used to focus on in the 1970s and where the debate is now, I think there is a certain technocratic element to how things are discussed, and there's a need to move beyond that, which I'll discuss. So the overall question is, what are the most important drivers for continued nuclear commitment? And indeed, what role might be played in specific settings and perspectives by military nuclear pressures? So I'm going to first discuss the Germany and UK comparison, because that's how we ended up with this curiosity over military-related factors in driving civil nuclear. And there's a paper on this comparing nuclear trajectories in Germany and the United Kingdom in Energy Research and Social Science. If you can't have access, then please get in touch, and I'm happy to share it. And really, to summarize a complex picture, what we wanted to do was build a multi-criteria analysis based on a wide variety of factors. Now, the discipline I come from, innovation policy, energy policy, these kind of things, sustainability transitions, there's this idea of the energy regime, which is the dominant energy pathway in a certain country. And new technologies come along and challenge that. And there's this idea of lock-in, that energy systems become locked in. And for a variety of economic and sunk costs and all these kind of factors, it becomes very difficult to change energy systems. But what this type of analysis usually does is focus on internal factors related to the energy system, and wider political considerations or anything outside of the energy sector is not usually considered. But we wanted to look at criteria that went beyond just these conventional points of analysis in innovation theory and transition studies. And what we did was, as I'll discuss in a minute, for each criterion is to amass evidence and then say whether, based on that evidence and that criterion, whether nuclear phase out would be more likely in Germany or the UK based on that specific thing. And that helps us to elucidate what are the kind of potential drivers of nuclear programs. So we're going to discuss the general market conditions, the penetration of nuclear in the generation mix. The idea here is the more dependent a country is on nuclear, the harder it is to change to a new energy pathway. But also innovation theory and things like that would attest that the better performing and more powerful the nuclear industry is, the more likely that country would be to continue with nuclear power. Whereas if there's constant crisis and the industry fails, then it's likely that a country would try something new. Then there's renewables resource potential. So countries with a better renewables resource potential would be more likely to make a change towards a different energy system away from nuclear. But there's also the strength of renewables industry. And then there's these outside factors, public attitudes, social movement activity, wider political factors about how countries differ in terms of their national political institutions and cultures, and the wider qualities of democracy. And you can use different kinds of rankings of democracy to try and build a picture of what is the relationship between how democratic a country is and the degree to which it pursues nuclear. Finally, and this wasn't the last criteria, it was a different number in the paper, but it flows better as this one for this presentation, the scales of military-related nuclear interests. Now, we've been told for a few decades now that civil and military nuclear are two different sectors. So it would be interesting, to say the least, if it was suggested in evidence that military-related factors might be contributing towards a country's persistence to pursue nuclear. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly. The first criterion, general market conditions. And just to say, to make it add up to the other parts of the presentation, what's really being underscored here follows on from Steve's presentation. What is really underscored by this analysis, to give the story away a little bit before I get into it, is how utterly odd the UK's determination to build nuclear power really is. And I'm going to show you why with these criterion. The first one is the general market conditions. Now, as we've heard from other speakers, nuclear power needs state intervention. It needs subsidy. It needs high public spending. The UK is a great example of, in the 1980s, how liberalisation and privatisation really doesn't work with new nuclear. Margaret Thatcher wanted to build Hinkley C in 1980s, the late 1980s. Many people forget about this. However, it couldn't be built because of the economics, because at the same time, Margaret Thatcher was liberalising and privatising the UK electricity market, and nuclear power had to be protected from that because it couldn't operate in that. And so it's very odd, based on this criterion alone, that the UK, which is a country that is neoliberal, it's committed to these ideologies of the market, knowing best, a small state, this kind of thing, yet it is very keen on nuclear. Germany's economy actually suits nuclear a lot better, I'd argue, based on varieties of capitalism literature. It's a coordinated economy. There's generally higher public spending. They have a much more coordinated innovation system with public funding of skills and all these kind of things that are very beneficial to nuclear that the UK doesn't have. Yeah, it's the UK, as we know, that persisted with new nuclear. These graphs are a little dated now from the paper, but we all know the picture. This is dependency on nuclear electricity. And again, it can be seen that Germany has been more dependent on nuclear until after Fukushima, where we can see the share of electricity generation in the UK going above that of Germany. But whether it's the historical maximum production, the average reactor size, production in the year before Fukushima, Germany has been far more dependent. So again, there's something curious here because the UK, as the country with less dependence on nuclear, is the country determined to pursue it, and Germany phases out. Nuclear engineering industry. Now, this is a very simple one. Germany had a very competitive nuclear industry. There was Siemens. It built lots of reactors. Despite the proclamations you hear time and time again from UK policymakers, the basic story is this: the UK no longer really has a substantial civil nuclear industry. The UK does not build civil nuclear reactors based on UK companies. The UK only ever sold 2 reactors, one to Italy, one to Japan, I believe. The UK's AGR reactor program was called one of the biggest industrial blunders in British history. The UK, in terms of innovation indexes and so on, very small number of patents globally. And you can see that Germany has been very innovative in the nuclear sector. Its innovation index being greater than that of of France, 25% global patents. You can look at things like the load factors of the average load factors of reactors. UK reactors perform poorly historically on this measure. German reactors were some of the best performing in the world. So in international comparisons, the British nuclear industry performs comparatively poorly compared to others. The German was one of the best. So here's another curiosity, is that it is the UK that persists and the Germany phases out. And the curiosity deepens when we see the alternatives. And this is from 2010, but this has been known for a long time. And the British government have known this for a long time, since the 70s and 80s, when they were modeling the resource potential of the UK. There we have cost resource curves for onshore wind and offshore wind. The basic story is this: the UK has a far better renewables resource than Germany. The UK has the best renewables resource in Europe. Scotland alone, which is a small part of the United Kingdom, has about 25% of the wind capacity alone. So really, we know what the resource availability in the North Sea, we know this, and this has been known for a long time. The UK had a far superior resource. So again, the curiosity deepens that it's the UK that persists and Germany doesn't. But we all know part of the story, that all these factors that academics usually focus on, innovation trajectories and performance of industry and the economics and actually, they aren't necessarily the main things that drive energy change. It's about public attitudes, it's about social movement activity. And we all know the story of Germany, so I won't go into it much. Protests of hundreds of thousands of people in the 1980s. The UK didn't have that. The UK was more a sort of polite British engagement with the nuclear industry in public inquiries in the 1980s. Yes, there was some protests, but not on the scale of Germany. But I want to point out something, that it's not such a simple picture. And this is from the Nuclear Energy Agency itself, Public Attitudes to Nuclear Power. Despite what the British government and nuclear industry will tell you, survey after survey for decades, there's not been that much of a change. And Germany and the UK, in terms of public attitudes, are not that dissimilar. In the UK, there's still mainly a kind of reluctant acceptance or ambivalence or negativity towards nuclear. So it's not so simple as there's just this public attitude in Germany that was so different. The UK public have not been that keen on nuclear either. And this is despite a huge amount of effort by industry and government and a huge amount of privileged space in the media to put pro-nuclear positions across. And you look at things like perceived knowledge and perceived risk, and the old adage is that the more you know about nuclear, the more in favor you'll be. That's what the industry says. Well, you can see actually Germany points towards something different. The more you know, the less in favor you are. So I just want to highlight this, that it's complex. And that's why we need to look at more general national political institutions and elite cultures and how that influences nuclear trajectories. And the consensual negotiative style of democracy that one gets in Germany differs markedly from the first past the post adversarial kinds winner takes all democracy you get in the UK. Now look at the Bundestag there in 2020. You can see there is considerable Green Party representation. They have been in the Bundestag since the 1980s. They got there because of the proportional voting system. Now, the UK did not have any Green representation in Parliament until 2010. And the only Green MP in the whole country is where I live, actually, which is in Brighton, Caroline Lucas. And this is the only party in England and Wales that has substantially interrogated and critically examined the UK's nuclear programme. The Lib Dems sometimes, when it suited them, have been anti-nuclear, but for the most part, England and Wales is a pro-nuclear country. There is no substantial discussion in Parliament that interrogates nuclear. Now, Scotland is a different story. Scotland, the Scottish National Party, is not building new nuclear. They want to go 100% renewables. And on that subject, in 2003, the supporters of nuclear energy group, and I've got this on documentation, said that it was fanciful and irrational for Scotland to think it could get 40% of its electricity generation from renewables. The current generation from renewables in Scotland is almost a net equivalent of 100% renewables. So let's just take that into consideration when we think about the rational experts who proclaim what is and is not possible with regards to energy systems. So really, I want to underscore that point that nuclear obsession in the UK is an English and Welsh phenomenon. Scotland will be an independent country in a few years, and it will pursue something different. Now, looking at the wider democracy patterns, and I'll rush through this for interest of time, it really is underscoring that the differences between the two countries. And what we did was we examined different rankings of democracy, the democracy barometer rankings, Economist Intelligence Unit rankings, global democracy rankings. And unfortunately, the UK is consistently ranks below Germany in terms of democracy rankings. So it could be that there is a relationship there between the degree of democratic, sort of how favorably they're considered to be a democracy and whether they commit to new nuclear. And there's been more recent papers in energy research and social science looking at exactly this point. And we can think maybe about some of the countries that are building lots of nuclear power currently, and whether democracy might indeed be one of the main obstacles to constructing new nuclear. And the final one, scales of military-related nuclear activities. And at this stage, we were simply posing this. We weren't making a conclusion, but we were using it as a criteria to compare the two countries. Well, it couldn't be a starker difference. UK is one of the only 5 official nuclear weapon states. Germany isn't. The UK has a large industrial base employing over 30,000 people committed to the production of nuclear weapons and submarines. Germany does not. So very simple difference there, and we were keen to examine this further. So we started looking at international links, and correlation does not equal causation, but hopefully you can see this. And this is expanding to the second part of our research, which is this international picture. And we can see that, sorry, something happening here. Oh, there we go. We can see that the leading global military powers are the most committed to large-scale nuclear new build. There is no global or regional military power that does not hold an active history of very strong pressures for civil nuclear power. No country either with or planning nuclear weapons or submarines is currently pursuing either a nuclear moratorium or phase out. So it's a correlative picture. It does seem that the presence of a commitment to military nuclear activity is a barrier to being able to phase out and pursue an alternative energy strategy. And we can see it in statements, and the statements are out there. If you look for them, they're out there. Rosatom have been very open that the reliable provision of Russia's defense capability is the main priority of the nuclear industry. Reports came out in 2017 from the US highlighting military priorities for civil nuclear industry, especially by former Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz. And they specifically said the civil nuclear industry provides a need to provide for nuclear navy requirements. There was a leaked US government memorandum in 2018 that stated our national security relies on a robust civilian nuclear power industry to support the entire US nuclear enterprise and US nuclear leadership abroad. In France, it's been raised in media debates in Le Monde of the risks of civil nuclear decline. And there was a secret report that possibly led to the resignation of Environment Minister Hulot, which highlighted these civil nuclear interdependencies and the need for France to build and maintain a civil nuclear industry because civil nuclear decline posed a threat to military nuclear infrastructures. And we've got statements from Japan, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Turkey, UAE, you name it. If you look, the statements are there, pointed towards these links. And let's drill down into the UK case study a bit more. Because a key thing is, you'll be familiar with the old civil military links, which was the diversion of fissile materials to be used in weapons. And indeed, let's not forget that the first civil, quote unquote, nuclear reactor, commercial nuclear reactor built in the world, opened by Her Majesty the Queen in 1956 in the UK, was to produce fissile materials for weapons programs. But this is different. This is about the industrial linkages, the skills, the capabilities, and the costs associated with that. And the industry have been quite clear that the UK is without the financial or personal resources to develop both programs in isolation. So the civil and military programs need each other. Indeed, the submarine program, as a redacted MOD report stated, is at the bare minimum necessary to deliver a new fleet of nuclear submarines. And they need to engage with the civil sector in order to do it. UK submarine industry has openly stated that it aims to mask military costs behind civil programs. But in energy policy, these debates are completely absent. But if you look in military documents, the links are there. But there are clues of that there's something else going on. The Hinkley C and the immense expense that it is, 3 times the current wholesale cost of electricity, has been examined by the National Audit Office, and they point towards non-energy strategic factors that are a reason why the UK remains committed to this development. We assume that this could relate to non-defense support for submarine base. And indeed, the top-up payments for Hinkley C are in the range of many tens of billions of pounds. So this is billions of pounds that will transfer from consumers from their energy bills to the nuclear industry. And it's through this transference, it's through the sustaining of tier 2, 3, 1 supply chain companies, British companies, through civil nuclear build, through the trickling down of this investment, that money is transferred from energy to sustaining military requirements. And we got on the record, the head of the MOD, the lead civil servant, say that yes, indeed, the civil military links are there and it needs concerted government action to make them work. It's on the record. An energy minister in 2018 talked about the artificial distinction between civil, military, nuclear, and the need to bring it to the end. And look, there are indeed rare surfacings of this issue. The document on the left, we were talking about small modular reactors earlier. Rolls-Royce have been very open about what small modular reactors could do. They construct reactors for nuclear submarines. They are in tremendous trouble in terms of their finances and other parts of their business. The cost of sustaining skills and capabilities to be able to build the submarines with very long lead times and so on is very expensive and it's very difficult. So they've made the case that investing in small civil nuclear reactors could relieve the burden from the MOD of developing skills and capability for the submarine program. We've had a brief breakthrough in the BBC News where Roger Harabin did cover that nuclear energy bills were being used to subsidize submarines. But politically, in Westminster, it's been barren. This should be an issue that should be examined. It's only in Scotland, really, that you can get any traction with this because, funnily enough, Scotland wants to get rid of nuclear weapons because it's Scotland that is forced to host nuclear weapons and the submarines. So We had a motion in the Scottish Parliament that highlighted that our analysis is plausible in terms of explaining the UK's otherwise odd commitment to new nuclear. But there's still a lack of transparency, and I want to contrast this with the USA. If you want to go and read this document, I think it's very interesting. It's 2019. The value of the US nuclear power complex to US national security. And they've actually put some figures in. They've said that this annual subsidy from civil to military amounts to $42.4 billion. That would be the economic shock if there was the erosion of the civil nuclear capability that's currently underway. They say that civil nuclear industry underpins the military nuclear enterprise. The Trump administration's national security strategy highlight the need to maintain and enhance the national security innovation base and increase the interaction between civil and military technologies. So these reports are very open. In the UK, it's less open. And you encounter documents like on the left there. This was a document that was only obtained through Rob Edwards, a committed journalist doing a Freedom of Information request. This is from 2014, and most of it is blacked out. But there are some useful things in it that say the submarine program is in crisis and we need to enhance the interactions between civil and military so that they can be built. But still, this issue remains undiscussed. And still what we get in the UK press usually is this kind of euphoria about these vague plans of mini nuclear reactors powering the north. Let's be quite clear, with the UK's renewable resource, the current cost trajectories, there is not an energy policy rationale for developing small modular reactors. And we need to just be a bit more clear about that and bring to the light the factors, the industrial factors that are driving this. And I want to sort of expand that to talk more about the nature of the debate. The UK is in a never-ending cycle of nuclear enthusiasm, of huge commitments, failure, and repeat. That's what happens. The AGR program, the fast breeders, nuclear waste in the Sellafield facility, the most hazardous site in Europe, Thorpe and Magnox reprocessing plants. In the 1980s, the promise was 10 new reactors within a decade. One was built. The collapse of the other Hinkley C in the 1980s, the bailing out of British Energy in 2002, and now this nuclear renaissance. I was in consultations where it was said that we need nuclear, we need several new reactors significantly before 2025 to help with rapid climate mitigation, to keep the lights on. It hasn't happened. But for some reason, this basic point that it's failed on its own promises and that it's renewables that have reduced coal use, kept the lights on, is still missing. And now we have the SMR euphoria. So this, what I'm concerned about is that really, this is in the UK treated as some sort of normal thing. This is what Britain does, but it isn't normal. And this question of why in academia, media, and politics need to be asked more. And it's relevant to the global scale as well. Just some conclusions now. Like many technologies worldwide, we can see that nuclear is facing a tough time. And we can see that patterns through Germany, UK comparison, democracy and military come to the fore as key issues. Strong circumstantial links, global civil and military nuclear, US, France, Japan, Brazil. And it's unequivocal that the military side is playing a role in the UK. And this really raises questions of rigor, robustness, and cost effectiveness of energy policy. And it really is grave for democracy. And I want to finish with this about what we're discussing today, the nuclear debate. Let's give peace and democracy a chance. And what I mean by this is there's a danger of becoming stuck in the narrow frames of the acceptable nuclear debate. It's how you certainly get usually invited to talk to the media and so on, is by talking within the acceptable delineations and not mentioning the military, not mentioning this. But in the 1970s, the Green movement demilitarizing energy systems and democratizing energy systems were key to these green movements. Look at Amory Lovins, look at all that early work. But the discussions have become more technocratic. On a technical level, we can see that renewables and energy efficiency offer more cost-effective and rapid means of decarbonizing energy systems. If you're serious about 2030, then it's about how quick and how cost-effective per kilowatt hour you can build low-carbon infrastructures. And once that becomes the aim, then nuclear doesn't look too good. So let's question the persistence of nuclear incumbency in the military and the geopolitical reasons behind this persistence. This is important for us to work towards more democratic and peaceful energy futures. And it's also more empirically accurate because despite 70 years, it's clear that the military imprints of nuclear power still persist in terms of this industrial interdependencies. And the UK case shows that. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I don't know about the rest of the participants, but I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. And I think it was a welcomed broadening of the debate, because I would also interpret perhaps the lack of questions that we received in the chat while you were presenting as a testimony to how unused, or like how we're not used to when the debate on energy policy perhaps goes outside of the frames of kilowatts, megawatts, terawatts, cost per megawatt hour, etc., etc. And we had those discussions to a large extent up until now when it comes to nuclear and renewables. So I think it was, you made some very poignant points, or like, especially even though perhaps the last bit on the military, it cannot, you know, directly be applied to Slovenia as a, it's not a military power, but it gives us a bit more context in terms of, yeah, the countries, the utilities that would in our case be, their role would be as suppliers. So we get a bit more, thanks to your presentation, a bit more of a wider global context when it comes to the persistence of and the push for new nuclear builds. And yeah, the first part of your presentation, I think it speaks to perhaps our situation even more so because of our experience when it comes to energy policies in the last decade. And we've had, let's say, one experience connected to our coal power plant that is a good example of all the things that you were mentioning. So how democracy and how decisions are being made by whom, and the surrounding debate, how that influences energy policy. Okay, so now I think we had, if anybody would want to add any questions to Philip, please do so in the chat, there's still time. I think we had now we have two remarks / questions. Okay, so I will go to Andrei Turko first, and he can pose his question himself. So, Andrei?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
You mentioned the relation between nuclear and the military. Okay, in the case of Britain, the relation of small modular reactors are most likely linked to reducing the cost of the nuclear propulsion of submarines. But in other countries, this is not necessarily the same. I mean, the early beginnings go back to nuclear for military use. But I don't think this argument is generally applicable. Take, for example, North Korea. It has no nuclear plants, but it's still developing nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Shall I? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, and I would say, yes, you've got North Korea, you've got Israel as another example, but I would posit that the general pattern that we set out does hold in terms of the intensity of the new build program above 6,000 megawatts, and the degree of military influence or aspiring military influence. You could look at something like Saudi Arabia. They've been very honest in a way. The Saudi king has specifically said, if Iran develops the bomb, we will develop the bomb. Yet the Americans are still enabling Saudi Arabia to develop these technologies, even though there isn't full cooperation there with the regulators. Brazil is another example. There's always been around their uranium enrichment. They refused to allow inspectors to come in 2002. But your point about countries is out, and you're absolutely right. We're not saying that this is the only factor. There's multiple factors at play. But what I would say is, we had a quote there from Rosatom. There's a big push in America now for Westinghouse, and there's this need to save the American nuclear industry, dominate export markets, and they're very concerned. They say Rosatom is building reactors everywhere. China wants to start building reactors anywhere. So a motivation for nuclear export and international developments could be that the bigger your nuclear industry gets, and the more you sustain it through revenue streams from all sorts of things, the more you're able to maintain this industrial base. So it's not saying it's one or the other. There are legitimate energy policy reasons that they want to pursue this, but it is the case that this expansion abroad does also help to sustain military nuclear, the industry. So not the fissile materials, but the investments in skills and capabilities and these kind of things. And that's what the Americans say in these documents.
Thank you, Philip. We have one more remark from Jan, or actually his comment or comment/question is a bit twofold. So I would invite Jan, but yes, I do agree that the first part was more suitable for other presentations, and we spent quite some time already discussing it. So anybody who's reading perhaps the first paragraph of Jan's question, I would again point them back to our previous presentation, especially from yesterday, to Sven and Dave's presentation. But I would invite Jan to share with us the second part of his comment/question regarding SMRs, submarines. So that is something that's more related to Philip.
So, I mean, the nuclear reactors are already used in submarine propulsion, and this technology has been already developed. So I don't really see why it's so problematic that you change it. I mean, that you use this experience for something good, some peaceful use, something that's good for the climate. I mean, there are some technical challenges that you need to solve. For example, I mean, this is classified usually, but we think that nuclear submarine use highly enriched uranium, which is not used in peaceful reactors because fears of nuclear proliferation. So this is something that you need to solve if you want to adapt this technology. But otherwise, after you solve some technical questions, I mean, you can actually learn a lot from all this effort that was put into these submarine reactors, because this technology has been used already for a lot of years. And I mean, we have learned a lot from this.
Yeah.
You're welcome to address.
Thanks, Jan, for your question, your comments, and they're good points. They're good points. On the high enriched uranium, it's my understanding that not all submarine fleets use high enriched uranium. I think the French don't. The British and the Americans do. So that is an interesting point. And you also highlighted something that is a problem within this research, that I would love to know more about the technological specificities of Rolls-Royce's design and Rolls-Royce's submarine reactor. But it's even harder to find out details about the submarine reactor than it is to find about missile systems and things like that. It is arguably more secretive in terms of the reactor design. So these technological specificities are something I'd like to learn more about. Rolls-Royce have shown that there are linkages, that there are crossovers. The specificities of what these are classified a lot of the time. Now, something you raised about was why not benefit from this military endeavor, was your point. And of course, the nuclear industry has done that prior. That's where it emerged from, the British one, certainly. And it wasn't until 1973 that civil and military were officially separated in the UK. So the links are there. But I look at it at the other way around. What's going on is, with the small modular reactors, is if, say, the UK government invests 2 billion, which is proposed it might do, in small modular reactors in a civil revenue stream, and that money is used to reduce the cost dramatically for the Ministry of Defence, for me, especially when consumers, taxpayers, who it's their money, are not being told that this is what is happening, that is basically subsidizing the military from another revenue stream. And in a functioning democracy, which the UK claims it is, that should be something that's considered unacceptable. Yet in the Westminster Parliament, it is impossible, nigh on impossible, to have this issue discussed. You have to go to the Scots and the Scottish. They're the only ones that will want to look into this. And I think they're the only ones that want to look into this because they want to get rid of nuclear weapons. So, yeah.
Thank you. I see your point. Thank you. Yeah, but I agree with this point. I mean, I work in nuclear in Slovenia, and I know nothing about these submarine reactors.
Yeah,
this would be also interesting.
It would be interesting. Yeah. Agreed.
Thank you to both. We still have 10 minutes roughly. If there are any other questions for Philip, at this point, please just raise your hand or add them in the chat, and you'll be invited to join the discussion. But yeah, I do see. Okay, no, Jan is answering a comment by somebody else. But yeah, as I said, I do find your points I found very valuable, the qualities of democracy, just because part of, let's say, the impetus or the reason also for this conference that it is taking place is also not just because we've noticed that there's a growing debate on new nuclear in Slovenia. We've noticed that, okay, the debate is one-sided, but we've noticed that there's, like there's continuously some kind of steps that are implemented in terms of heading towards a new nuclear build, but and we considered those steps are not really, let's say, in line with some democratic principles. So it's kind of, for example, in our long-term climate strategy, we have the so-called nuclear scenario, and it's sort of in the footnotes written somewhere. We've had now, as part of the Corona response packages, we had a list of priority infrastructure projects, and somehow new nuclear reactor made its way in there, which would mean that we would have to start developing the spatial plan for it. And those were all measures, of course, and like legislation that was passed, or initiatives that were passed and went through the parliament on, let's say, an expedited note. So in that way, I found at least the first part of your presentation, very valuable to how things we've experienced in Slovenia unfolding in the past when it comes to energy policy, and what we fear is might be the case again. Okay, we have a let me just see. We have, yes, we have still a bit more time, and I see a raised hand from Jan. So I will invite Jan, and then we have another question that is actually coming from our next speaker. So first Jan, and then we have Jochen with his question.
Yeah, I would like to react on the question that Jan Mallet asked to Matjaž. To be clear, are you also doubting the decarbonization potential of nuclear energy or just fear other environmental consequences? If you look at the influence of nuclear energy on decarbonization, there is not much discussion about whether nuclear energy is emitting a lot of CO2 or not. I mean, there is a discussion about the degree. And I have to honestly say that I'm very distressed about the fact that a whole set of untransparent corporate studies on lifetime greenhouse gas emissions is setting the pattern there, which come to conclusions of amounts of, I've even seen 3 grams per kilowatt hour, but more 7 grams, 13 grams, up to 17 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Those studies do not make it in meta studies, in critical meta studies. They're very often taken up because they are going around in EU circles, etc. But if I look at meta studies, then the more reasonable estimates are between 20, 23 and 60, 70 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. That puts nuclear on the same level as PV, for instance, with a lot of uncertainties in both. So that is not the issue. The issue is that investment in nuclear, first of all, would address only a very tiny part of the problem we have to address. The Harmony scenario from the World Nuclear Association wants to see at least a doubling or a 5-fold increase, but doubling nuclear capacity, even with new reactors or with old designs or with new designs, it doesn't really matter, is physically impossible before 2050. We don't have the big forging capacity in the world, that we cannot develop it in that time, to mention only one issue. So it is coming, we're talking about less than 4% greenhouse gas emissions in the total picture, and that is marginal in comparison with the rest that we are doing. So it's not very much. And what it delivers very late. We see now in countries that have relatively good ideas about how to continue with climate, and then I mentioned Sweden, the Netherlands, we see now suddenly a nuclear discussion coming in between, which is keeping up the implementation of measures that we can do now, today. And that will deliver a slower rate of decarbonization. I can see it happening already in the field, that rates of decarbonization slow down. An example is Finland, that for years had, in the early 2000s, an interesting development in wind energy. At the moment that all kilowatt to 3 came on the table, that stopped. That was the same with efficiency measures in Finland. They have been reduced since the moment all kilowatt came on the table.
Jan,
and they now have to come. So
sorry, Jan, I would just ask you to wrap up because we have
decarbonization is not a question about amount of CO2 per kilowatt hour. It's an amount. It has to do with the fact that nuclear cannot deliver sufficiently. What it delivers too late, and it delivers it at a too high cost, which means it is crowding out more efficient and more effective measures that we have to implement now.
Okay, thank you, Jan. We'll go now to a question that actually, because it relates specifically to Phil's still presentation. So I'm inviting Johan, who is actually our next speaker, to ask the question to Phil.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Phil, and hi, everybody. I was just wondering what you think I mean, of course, I'm aware that the UK does build new nuclear reactors, but still, like, what is your take on the long-term prospects of nuclear in the UK? I mean, there is certainly a decline happening. I mean, you said already the industry is was always weak and is pretty much gone. So what is your take on the long-term prospects? Thank you.
Thanks, Jochen. And well, it's a good question, and I think so. It's hard to keep up with the the UK's nuclear renaissance. So the latest, of course, is that Wilfa has gone pretty much. So that was going to be an BWR reactor. It's not being built. The Toshiba reactor up in the northwest, that's gone. Bradwell B is unlikely, I think, because of the issues Steve raised around Chinese investment and the recent concerns around that. So you've got Sizewell C as a big EPR, but they're going to have to perform financial acrobatics to be able to secure investment, whether it's the regulated asset-based model or even the state taking a direct stake. So then you have all the problems with the EPR. So nothing is set in stone. What I will say is, I keep saying this to people, and people get annoyed at me with the repetition, but the important thing about the UK is it can be big, it can be small. The fascinating thing about the UK is that whatever happens, no matter how bad things get, there always must be some nuclear power. And that is the very thing that we need to understand in order for it to ever change. And I do believe it relates to the military factor we pointed out. So with the small modular reactors, I agree with Steve. They're not really a viable option. These are paper-based reactors at the moment. This is not something Rolls-Royce has done. But I think what will happen is there'll be a demonstration SMR built at some point that will facilitate investment and training and all these kind of things that will alleviate the costs for the MOD. There won't be much built other than that. Maybe Hinkley C will still be built. I don't see the rest being built. And that will be it. But that will be just enough for England by this stage, because Scotland will have gone, to still drive around its submarine with its nuclear weapon, pretending to be a global power, which is what this is all about. It's the remnants of empire. The real thing that's being discontinued here is an empire. So yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Because we still have 2 minutes. If Andrei doesn't mind, just to speed up the discussion, can I read out one of I think you had the last question still, and if it relates to the UK, or at least Phil can give us a UK angled response, because Andrei asked, what is the role of the fossil fuel lobby? Germany is phasing out almost carbon-free nuclear. It spent 500+ billion euros on renewables, but its fossil fuel usage remained practically unchanged over the last 20 years. So I guess, I don't know if Phil is expected to comment on Germany, or like what is the role of fossil fuel lobby in the UK?
Well, just quickly on the
comment on the entire comment plus question.
Just quickly on the Germany point, we must be careful to keep up with recent events. And what you can see is that there has been a dramatic reduction in coal use in Germany in the past year. Yes, there has. There has. In the past year, you can go and look at the figures. And yes, there was a slight rise after the Fukushima decision, but it is the case that renewables are generating nearly 50% of electricity production this year. It's a record, and it is going down. So we can't anymore simply say that the nuclear closure is leading to more coal use. If we look at the latest figures, and that's anyone can go and look at them. In the case of the UK, the fossil fuel lobby was there's a strong oil lobby, and that's obviously still there. Coal has pretty much been reduced, but I would ask you to tell me, if you're going to defend nuclear's role in it, tell me simply, what is the role of new nuclear construction in the UK in reducing coal use in the UK over the past 10 years? What is it? Show me a graph of it.
Oh, I agree for the case of UK, because I think at the time of Margaret Thatcher, the coal industry was virtually killed, or at least subdued. But I don't agree with your conclusions about usage of fossil fuels. Maybe some of the coal was replaced by gas, but recently Germany is opening new fossil fuel plants, coal-fired plants. So I don't see that as a reduction of fossil fuel usage.
Yes, but I'd say again to just look at the statistics from this year about renewables production and coal reduction.
And it is also not, I mean, there is one coal power plant that is being commissioned in Germany at this moment, and it's a shame. That is definitely true. But it shows the power of that fossil lobby, which in Germany is the nuclear lobby. It equals the nuclear lobby. Those are the same companies, the same people. The problem that you see there, André and Jan, is the power of a centralized system. That is something completely different and that we need to discuss. And I think the renewable development has been effective in undermining it. Now look at the power of EDF in France and the fact that it is too big to fail. Now look at the power of Vattenfall in Sweden and the fact that it is not always that open to, it's getting better, I have to say that. But that is a question that you indeed need to address, but it is independent from nuclear. That's an energy systematic question.
Okay, let's give, because we're still quite on time, but I would just give the space for Phil if he has any last remarks as the speaker, and then we'll go into a short break before our last session.
Yes, well, 2 points. So one is on, I find it fascinating how quickly we go back to CO2 economics. You know, what I've just presented is that there is a mass subsidy from civil energy bills to military infrastructures, and that is in and of itself a key driver of nuclear expansion around the world, and it should be a key issue that we discuss. It is to do with democracy, and it is indeed the kind of issue that we used to discuss, or not me, I wasn't alive, but in the 70s and 80s. So, you know, I think there's an awareness that we need to move beyond these technocratic discussions if there's to ever be a successful sort of overcoming of these joined infrastructures. And the second point is, I will speak to the climate change thing, which is that it's so simple, the case of the UK. Since 2005, these promises have been made of reactors by 2020, that nuclear is a necessity. If we don't build nuclear before 2020, all the lights are going to go out in my house, and climate change is going to go through the roof, and renewables are too expensive, and it doesn't, none of it was true. None of it was true. And the experts and the people that proclaim themselves to be rational were saying this is essential, and it simply wasn't true. So if you're looking at climate mitigation and nuclear, the UK is a fantastic case study. It hasn't done anything. So I'll leave it there.
I think we got Phil riled up. So that was your ending your presentation on a, yeah, but I think it was very, yeah, I think, but yeah, it is true. We're kind of always kind of going back, even though you've led us into reviewing also other angles when it comes to decisions made within the energy policy. Maybe just, I'm the moderator, but I see that there's a, yeah, there's a growing debate in the chat, which is actually, I still think it's useful, and we won't be, how do you say, we won't be asking you to just stick to the questions, because I think it's actually quite informative, the back and forth for now between the participants. Maybe just one more question when we're talking about this issue, especially now, and when we're bringing up examples. We also, and the example of Germany that is also often being brought up. I also want to kind of lead us back to sometimes the Slovenian frame, because where the discussion is, or at least we want it to be, whether new nuclear builds are a viable climate solution. So when we're bringing up the Germany example, we need to be aware that that's a different also situation, a different decision, where in Germany we have the case of nuclear phase out. That is not, let's say, a situation currently present in Slovenia. So maybe that would just be my addition when we're using these international examples, or the example in Germany, and how it can or cannot relate to the situation domestically. Okay, I hope we'll continue the discussion in the next session. We'll be joined by Jochen Markert from the University or ETH Zurich. We will, because we're 5 minutes late, so let's still stick with a 10-minute break, and let's just meet 5 minutes, how do you say, 11:35. We meet again, okay? Good.